CEE,
Central Europe Explained,
an IDM podcast series
powered by Erste Group.
Episode 51, European Parliament Elections 2024. Welcome to Central Europe Explained. My name is Gloria Becerril, and I'm thrilled to be back for the fourth season of this podcast, where we will explore the events in the region from a different perspective this time and combine personal experiences with the academic expertise of our team. In this very first episode, we will focus on the 2024 European Parliament elections, which is a crucial event that will shape the future of the European Union. The elections have just taken place, and we're here to unpack their implications. To help us navigate these discussions, I have here with me today a panel of guests from various European countries. Each one of them brings their very own perspective and personal stories to the table. Can you please introduce yourselves and tell us where you are from?
Hi, I'm Sebastian. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, and I voted in Austria.
I'm Melanie, and I'm Austrian.
Hi, I'm Malwina. I come from Poland, but this time I have voted in Austria.
Hello, I'm Péter Techet. I was born in Budapest and currently I'm living in Vienna.
Hi, my name is Kamila. I'm from Russia, so I couldn't participate in these elections.
Hi, here Daniel speaking. I'm originally from Czechia and I also voted in Czechia.
And myself, I'm Gloria from Mexico. I cannot vote either, just like Kamila, but that's exactly why I'm very interested on what you all have to say. I love the diversity. I think this will give us a very rich perspective. But remember, beyond the politics, let's also not forget about your experiences, your hopes and your fears for the future of the European Union. First of all, let's talk about the elections as an individual right and obligation. Do you remember the first time you voted in the European Parliament elections? What does participating or not participating mean to you?
I voted in the first European Parliament election in Hungary in 2004. It was in fact my very first election. Whether they are European or other elections, it is important for me not only to participate in the elections, but also to discuss about the politics before. Even if many people do not like election campaigns, I enjoy the period before the elections. Despite everything, it is a time for discussion, so a celebration of pluralism.
Well, I actually really don't remember the first time I voted. I know when it was. It was 2004 because in 1999 I was only 17 and back then in Germany you weren't allowed. This time you could vote at this age. And I remember that I participated in every election that was possible for me, and we had this ritual where I would go with my parents to the voting booth. And so I'm pretty sure that I did that too, but I actually don't remember really much about this election, which is also a reason why I have not been involved in EU matters so much, because it was not something that you would be taught at school, for instance, back in those days. And I think that changed, and it's good that it changed, but we still have a lot to catch up here, as also the votes of the young population shows in this election.
I also have similar experiences as Sebastian. My first time voting in the European Parliament elections was 10 years ago, back in 2014. And I can't also really recall the day, but I always went there with my parents because my parents are quite a political people. And I have to always force them a little bit to vote. So I always accompany them to the room and we cast the vote together. But why I'm actually voting in these elections, and not only in these elections, as I already mentioned, in the IDM short insight, for me it represents kind of civic duty. So that's the reason I'm doing that. And every election is kind of special for me, or important, significant for me. And as I said also in our IDM short insight, I don't think that European elections would be less significant than our regional or national elections.
I mean, I also don't remember the very first one, which is interesting because I remember every other election, parliamentary election, presidential election. And I think this is very symptomatic of the situation in Poland and the perception of the elections to European Parliament, that they don't cause that much emotions as other elections. They are therefore a bit more invisible. And we also see that in the turnout, because this year the turnout was below 40% again. I mean, last time was 45, but I mean, this is not increasing.
Kamila, how does it feel to you that you're living here, but you cannot vote? How did you feel when you were witnessing the whole election process?
I mean, it's a kind of reality I used to. Living in Europe for 8 years already, I feel like kind of it's a pity to not have my voice heard or be counted, because I've never participated in a free and democratic elections as in my country. There is not such a possibility, and I think that it's such a big privilege for European citizens to defend democracy by voting, by expressing their opinion, which counts, which is not a kind of a thing in my country. So I think it's a big pity for people who are not really realizing this privilege. So I appeal all kind of European citizens to not take it for granted.
Like they say, sometimes you don't know what you have until you lose it. I hope we don't get to that point for us to actually participating and doing something about it. How do you feel about these elections in particular, about the outcome? And also, how did you prepare to vote? What is important to you when it comes to your decision-making process?
I'm a German-Hungarian citizen and I'm living now in Vienna, so I could choose from 3 different countries where I will vote. In the end, I decided for voting in Hungary. In this country, the European Parliament election is clearly a referendum for or against the current European Union. And for the first time since Viktor Orbán took power 2010, there is also a party that can become a strong alternative to the current government. Therefore, these elections in Hungary, like actually all elections in Hungary from local to national level, were a referendum about Orbán.
Well, when it comes to my decision-making process, I think it's exactly that. That, of course, I try to vote the party that is somehow representing my interests, but also the interest of marginalized people. Like we heard here on the table, there are some people, and there are very many people in Europe who cannot participate in these elections, but who live here, who work here. So it's also maybe to kind of represent their interest, which is, I mean, I don't know what all of those people would vote for, right? But somehow to make it more inclusive, I guess. And here it also comes to marginalized people, minorities, doesn't matter if they're sexual minorities, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, etc. Because I think if we go to elections, we should think about what do we want our society to look like, and not only about our own personal ambitions.
Maybe regarding my decision-making process, I think regarding the EU elections especially, it's important for me that the party I'm voting for also tries to focus on EU-relevant topics and not only does a national campaign, which a lot of parties unfortunately still do. So I think for me it's important that the party I'm voting for has a more pan-European approach.
I think it's also important to not forget that these national contributions to the European Parliament is in the end not hinging on personalities, but we should see which party families and political groups in the European Parliament will have a majority and what will result out of this. And I think this is not something that is communicated in the elections. This is not something that we really talk about. that it is less about what your national politicians that are running are promising you, but there is going to be broader implications. And as Sophia said, I think it's important to look at what are the parties standing for in their political groups rather than individual people running in this campaign.
This election was very special for me because I could have voted in Austria, and usually I have no impact whatsoever, even I have been living here for 10 years, on what is happening in Austrian politics. There are very few exceptions, and this election was one of them, and this is why I wanted to participate, to also make sure that I support those parties that talk about European issues, that are pro-European.
For me, it's always important, generally speaking, it goes for all elections actually, that some kind of electoral integrity is assured, and that these elections are fair and free, because unfortunately, even nowadays, that's not always the case if we look on EU member states, but also non-EU member states.
How do you think the results of this election will impact on your local community or your country specifically? And also, I would like to know if there are particular policies or changes that you personally are looking forward to or that you might be concerned about.
I'm really concerned that we see a surge in parties that reject the very idea of European integration, because I already see tendencies that the surge of the far right is not as dramatic as it has been expected. I think we also need to see how that influences the different countries. Austria, of course, with the upcoming parliamentary elections in fall, but even more so, most likely France, which is out of my area of expertise, but then, of course, my home country, Germany. And if you look at certain areas in Germany where we also will have regional elections in fall, this is very worrisome. How, especially also young people that, if you look at the voting shifts, have supported more progressive, more green, more environmental friendly policies 5 years ago, are now turning to more conservative, up to extreme far right destructive policies, especially given how the politicians that have been running there have been involved very clearly in foreign influence, especially from the Russian Federation. And I'm afraid that this, of course, will also influence how we are tackling topics like not only the European Green Deal, but enlargement and especially the support for Ukraine.
Instead of European political issues, the election campaign was dominated in Hungary by domestic political issues. In any case, I also followed the election campaigns of other countries, especially in Austria, Germany, Italy, Croatia and Slovakia. So how strong can the right-wing parties become? Are the differences between them stronger than the similarities? Is the European People's Party opening up to Giorgia Meloni? Which group can Viktor Orbán join? What impact will the elections have on the national elections in Austria, on the regional elections in Germany, and on the domestic politics in Italy or Croatia?
I hope that with the new commission, the support and help and stance and solidarity to Ukraine will persist, because it's a very vital question of the existence of Ukraine, and also it's a vital question to the country where I am originally from. So this is my biggest hope, that this track will continue the same way.
What was interesting for me actually is that many established parties actually lost a lot. If we speak, for example, about the mandates. So there is, as Sebastian mentioned, about the young voters and so on. What we can see in Czechia is also the fact that most probably also young voters are really looking for new alternatives, new parties, which are on one hand, of course, criticizing the government coalition, but at the same time are also offering new solutions. In many cases, of course, these conservative up to radical solutions, but at the same time, there are new faces who are who have the courage enough to really address certain topics which are close to the people's heart. And I think this is something they, not only young voters, but in case of Czechia, particularly of young voters, are very attractive to. And that's the reason I think also why the new parties who run for the first time in these EP elections actually scored with such a good results.
Thank you, Daniel. Malwina, what about Poland? Is there anything that you might be concerned or hopeful about Poland?
I mean, there's good news and there's bad news in Poland concerning this election. So the good is that for the first time in 10 years, the Law and Justice Party didn't win the election, wasn't the strongest party, although just by a narrow margin. But a very negative tendency is that the far-right party Konfederacja scored 12%, which is a very high number. And this is also thanks to young voters, as already Daniel mentioned. But here we had to look more closely into the data, and those young voters are mostly young men. Women tend to vote more for left-wing party, which in this election didn't score very well. It was just 6%. So we have this tendency of the surge of far right also appearing there. It's maybe not as strong as it is in France or it is in Austria and Germany, but we see that this tendency is there. And then we still have Law and Justice, which is like looking at different definitions. I wouldn't say far right yet, but it is a party which is very populist, right-wing populist with some far right tendencies.
I would like to add something about migration policies, which I think is important because it's one of the topics that have been dominating the European political discourse, at least for the last decade. And we know that the new pact on migration and asylum has been adopted before these elections, but now comes the implementation phase, and each member state has 2 years now to draft this implementation. And I think also when it comes to this, we will see this right-wing shift that we saw in some member states playing out in this. And I think this is also something where we have to keep our eyes on it when it comes especially to human rights, because even the new pact was already very much criticized from human rights experts. And now looking at how this will be implemented will be very curious.
Maybe just briefly to follow up on what happens on the European level or in the Parliament, European Parliament. I'm actually very concerned that due to the fact that Renew and Greens lost votes and SD are not gaining any votes, that the EPP will team up with the ECR on the far right, and that will of course influence the future policies of the European Parliament.
It's interesting because also, as it has been mentioned before, these conservative tendencies are also reflected on votes from young people. And from my perspective, that's something very interesting as a phenomenon. There has been a lot of discussion about engaging younger voters in the political process. So what do you think can be done to increase youth participation in European Parliament elections, and why is it important?
I think it is important to get away from this tokenism of youth that we often have in elections, not only on EU level, but here in Austria, for example, the legal voting age is 16. In most other countries, it's 18. But now for the European elections, there have been countries, I know Belgium, I think Germany as well, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think Malta, who allowed also 16-year-olds to vote for these European elections. And I think it should be equal in all member states. So maybe there can be an effort done that for the next European Parliament elections, like all European citizens the same age can decide. Because now 16-year-old Austrians can vote in these elections, 16-year-old people from Czechia or Poland can't. So.
Yeah, and if I can follow up on that, I agree totally that lowering that voting age would be beneficial. I mean, in many countries, you can marry before you're 18. You can have your driver's license, but you can't vote. So why? And also, politicians don't address young people. or very rarely. And one of the reasons is because they can't vote. So maybe if we want to have more policies, more issues, more communication directed at the young people, then they have to have this power to vote. So they are interesting for politicians themselves.
Thanks, Malwina. Earlier, Sebastian, you mentioned that you didn't learn this in school back then. Do you know if this has changed?
It has changed, but what also has changed is that how you get your information about parties and their programs. And I've held seminars on European integration in schools myself. So there is this realization that we need to talk more about what is the European Union all about. But on the other hand, we are always lagging behind, because right now the seminars and information about the European Union is not enough anymore. And on the one hand, I think this voting for far-right parties in the age group, especially if we look 16 to 24-year-olds, especially when we look to Germany, which might be alarming, but might have to also be put in some context. Because on the one hand, the young votes at the national elections in Germany have been the last time, especially for the Greens and the Liberals, even more so. And they're both in government, and they are not very popular at the moment. So I think that also drives this. But we must also not forget that especially far-right parties, they have their own channels, and they are very, very good in using social media to get their talking points across. And that very much influences the discourse, and we are not prepared for this. And I think this is something that we need to keep in mind when, of course, the talking points, the children are our future, and we need to also appeal to the younger voting force. This is like, these are phrases that have been used for decades, and they become then older voters. And if they are socialized in this sort of environment, we are disenfranchising even more people from politics that wants to be constructive, that wants to be building a common future together, and not only destroy.
Let's imagine the future now. Given the results of these elections, how do you envision the European Union in the next 5 years, especially with the potential inclusion of new member states, for example? What kind of union do you hope to see for yourselves and the future generations?
I hope to see an enlarged union. I'm not so sure if this will happen in the next 5 years. I don't think so. But that is the union I want.
Yeah, so I'm also not sure it's so realistic, but I would hope for a bigger EU with more member states, also more efficient in decision-making processes, more united EU, more competencies on the supranational level, and pan-European elections, and in general EU that is a competent and global player in the world.
I would envision, of course, a European Union which consists of all countries which are located on the European continent. Finally, I think we waited too much time for this enlargement. And at the same time, I would really like to wish that every politician, every government representative, but even more importantly, every citizen would finally realize this potential of a united Europe, of united approach in different areas of decision making is the only way actually how to really cope with the global changes, global challenges and developments we are currently facing. And of course, it all probably ends with the climate change, but of course there are also other factors we have to deal with as we Europeans.
I hope to see the European Union more independent, not being dependent on the autocratic states because of the gas and oil resources. So it's also a matter of kind of a Green Deal. And yeah, hopefully in the next 5 years, independent and stronger European Union.
I think economy matters, but I also hope that the EU will remain a community of values, and those values will be even more respected, regardless of age, class, citizenship, EU citizenship or non-EU citizenship. But I also see the EU as a peace project. I mean, one of the reasons why Poland was in the EU was to finally be at peace, so to say, and be free of potential attacks. And this is why I would really look forward to enlargement. I'd also, like Melanie, don't think it will happen in the next 5 years, but sometime soon, because I believe that this can bring peace to those countries which are still waiting to be part of the Union.
Despite everything, I view the results rather optimistically. I hope that the European Parliament will have more weight in the European politics. It is the only body that is directly elected by the people. Whether a European peoplehood, in the sense of a demos, already exists or not, is of course a big question. But it is clear that through the European Parliament it might be possible for the European Union to be perceived not as foreign policy, but as domestic policy for the citizens. I hope that the debates will not always remain within national frameworks, so that a common European public sphere will emerge, where we discuss the same topics, of course with different ideas, but that is part of pluralism. So my optimistic hope is that even the anti-EU parties will increasingly think pan-European. Dialectically, European integration can progress through crisis. And in Europe, we always needed crisis for further, stronger integration. The whole idea of European integration was a response to the Second World War. And we have enough crises today. We have nothing to complain about not having a crisis. So I hope that we will therefore find more and more European solutions.
I mean, I would, of course, echo everything that has been said, but I'm also hoping that this headline that I'm reading now, the center holds, is not an excuse to say, okay, we don't need to do anything for the next 5 years. Because we've seen that so often. When Biden won against Trump, we didn't prepare for the possibility that Trump can come back. Now, this is something that might happen. And some other headlines also said that this was Europe's Trump moment, which would mean that they would have to wake up, that there are parties actively trying to destroy what is there. But this has been the case 5 years ago. This has been the case 10 years ago. And even if the center holds, the center is shrinking. And there will then just be a development that we don't want to see. And we can argue if we do it more green, if we do it more focusing on the economy, if we stress values more, there's different possibilities how we can go about this. But we're not talking about that. We are so to say entrenching ourselves in the sense that, well, this time we still made it, and there might not be a next time. And there needs to be a much bigger focus on the protection of democracy and bringing people to vote that actually are interested in those processes and transform these processes to a European level rather than having nationalistic discourse.
I believe we can conclude this has been a very interesting discussion. So thank you all for your insights. And before we say goodbye, I would like to recommend to you the series Parlement. It's a Franco-German Belgian comedy about the life of a guy called Sami, who is an intern at the European Parliament, and he gets involved in all sorts of funny and absurd situations. It's a comedy, but it can still give us an idea of the complexities of working for such an important institution. It's available on Netflix in case you would like to watch it. On the 9th of June, not only the European elections took place, but also Bulgarian parliamentary elections. So if you're interested in this and other parliamentary elections taking place in the countries of our target region, you can go to our YouTube channel where you can find a playlist with videos about these elections. This was CEE, Central Europe Explained, a podcast series produced by the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe. If you enjoyed listening to us, make sure to subscribe to the IDM podcast series on your favorite podcast platform. Additionally, you can explore our other work on our website www.idm.at. If you have any feedback or if you're interested in collaborating on a podcast episode, please do not hesitate to contact us through our social media channels at IDM Vienna or write us an email to idm@idm.at.
IDM Podcast.
Institut für den Donauraum und Mitteleuropa.
Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe.
European perspectives.
Regional actions.
Cooperation and expertise since 1953.